Obviously by the attendance here, this is fuller than a church gets probably. So we all know something's coming down the road, and the road's not very long anymore. So pleased that we're all giving it the attention that we're going to have to get through this. So the title we were given is to just, as Gordon said, talk about how can we get ready basically for what hits January 1. And there's been a lot of activities and pressures and organizations involved in the past years kind of leading up to where this is going. So obviously a lot of us have read the news headlines and from various activist groups and organizations, some within the food system, some outside the food system that want to have an impact on this. And there's been editorials, and a lot of them have pointed towards what's happened in Europe, where a lot of these changes in regulations on antibiotics first started. And Peter will probably get into a little bit more about how that came about over there and maybe how that's influencing the U.S. and the direction we're headed. Katie Couric did a section on television about this topic, and that garnered a lot of social media attention and so on too. And so the upshot is that there's some groups that want to point us towards concerns that maybe farmers and veterinarians aren't on board with where the public wants to go. And I think a lot of us in the room, obviously, we take very seriously the work that we do with the food animal species, and we're trying to be very safe. We know we're in the food business, and I'd point to some data from 2015 on FSIS that looks at residues. They did a study looking at cull pigs and cull sows and found less than 0.3% of those tissues from those animals had residues. And so that's with over-the-counter use of antibiotics. So certainly as we focus even more attention on it, that'll go down further. But that leads the way in food animals. We're doing an outstanding job in our industry, and so what we really need to talk about now is how do we deal with the regulations? Legislation has been attempted in the congressional level. Representative Slaughter and one of our favorites, Dianne Feinstein, have been certainly pushing for that. And that's caused some pressures on the FDA to probably move this along quicker rather than later. And so the primary concern is about resistant bacteria in humans. So what's the impact of food animals on creating resistant bacteria? That's the point that's driven home again and again as we've had meetings about the issues, and that's their concern. Activists, Congress, the FDA, and the public want to know and want to have a say in what we're doing. And I think we realize that as we've seen some differentiation in product lines for people that want to have antibiotic-free, want to have organic product. And so we've got new definitions today. And some of this is an area that we need to be reflective on and find out how we can satisfy the true food animal consumer. We hosted a group from the Government Accountability Office a few years back, and they had a report that they issued after they had visited a number of food animal locations, cross species, and reviewed what the FDA had done so far. And their bottom line is that we don't have good data on how does antibiotic resistance occur. We haven't spent a lot of time on that. And so where that goes down the road as far as in terms of how do we track usage and how do we start to understand resistance is yet to come. What the FDA has moved on so far doesn't really take us to any details on that. It's more ensuring that we have veterinarians involved and that we have oversight that's consistent across injectable antimicrobials, water antimicrobials, and food antimicrobials. So the FDA is moving with urgency. Change is coming. And I'll just review as part of my presentation this morning some of those changes in the timeline that has occurred. One of the first things that the FDA did regarding feed antibiotics is back in 2003, any new antibiotics will require veterinary oversight. So no more over-the-counter products are going to be released by the FDA for antimicrobials. It also describes a risk assessment process where the companies or the sponsor of those products would have to demonstrate that the use of their products per label doesn't create resistance. They attach to Guidance 152 an Appendix A that we'll talk a little bit about that lists important human drugs, and those are the ones they're particularly focused on, is the products that get used in humans that we also use in food animal production. And a couple of those that we're familiar in the swine industry are Palmitil and Nuflor, which were the first two and only two so far that fell under Guidance 152 that were approved only with the use of a veterinary feed directive, which is in a way a prescription for using it in the feed. This is kind of a busy slide, but it lists those classes of antibiotics and some of the individual antibiotics within those classes. That this top section are those that were classified as important, highly important, or critical for human health. So any of the products that include these substances would need to have a veterinary feed directive or a prescription for their use. The ones on the bottom that are not used in human or are not classified as important, highly important, or critical do not require a VFD. So not every product that we use in the industry will require a VFD, but the vast majority of them will. Secondly, in 2012, Guidance 209 came out, and Guidance 209 made two very definitive statements on what judicious use of antimicrobials means in the food animal industry. A is that only uses that are therapeutic, which means prevention, control, and treatment, are allowed in food animals. And number two is that any usage will require veterinary oversight. Guidance 213, which came out a year later, then went through kind of more details on how that would be implemented. And it set aside a 3-year time period to work towards those goals. So it again reviewed those drugs that are listed as important for humans, and they spent time in concert with the sponsors of those products to start to work out label changes and how that process would work. So it results in the elimination of production uses, those uses for average daily gain and growth promotion. And it moves over the counter to VFD and RX only, again requiring veterinary oversight as well for water and feed antibiotics. 2 years later then, this past summer in June of 2015, they finalized the VFD rule. And so this laid out the plan and the timeline for transitioning those over-the-counter feed medications to VFD use only. And as Gordon mentioned, that's going to hit the end of this year. So by 1st of January 2017, that'll be implemented. So in summary, we're going to move towards veterinary oversight. The FDA is going to require that for all use of antibiotics. So we'll need to recognize that and find systems to make that work conveniently for the farm and the veterinarian and the feed mill. And I think we've got some good opportunities. There's already been a lot of efforts within the industry to develop programs to allow us to accomplish that. Obviously, the PQA program has promoted that for 3 decades almost. And most of us in the room have been very involved in ensuring that there's communication and dialogue on any treatment of animals anyway. So I think for the swine industry, the process will create some headaches, but I think we're largely on board already with that type of use. It's just more the documentation and ensuring that timeliness of needing feed for pigs and having the right feed medication at the right time for the right pig is where we have to focus. We have to make things legal, efficient, timely, so that we can accomplish the same health standards that we've been after in the past. So the documentation will improve our standing, I think, with the public, and we just need to work towards making it work for us.